My third and latest Leica lens purchase for my new M11 is this amazing 50 millimeter Summilux-M f1.4. I bought this used online, but it's in excellent condition, no signs of wear. And the first owner only had it for a few months before he sold it. So it came with all the packaging and the papers, and it still has some of the Leica warranty left on it. So I brought this with me to my trip to New York City to test out as my main primary shooter. I talked on my previous video about a two lens kit with a 35 and 75, but a 50 millimeter might be an even more simpler one lens kit. I thought about bringing just this lens and the M11 body. But since I was driving 3 hours to get there, I wanted to bring an extra lens as a secondary lens. So I decided to bring the 75 millimeter for longer distance shots, since I knew I wasn't going to be shooting indoors and I was going to be visiting the Statue of Liberty. So the 75 might be useful for that and getting some longer distance shots of buildings. I didn't think I would need my 35 since during my last trip to Philadelphia, I brought my 35 and I ended up cropping many of those images down to a 50 millimeter point of view. But I ended up using this 50 millimeter about 95% of the time. The only time I used my 75 was with the Statue of Liberty, and every other shot in this video was made with the 50 millimeter 1.4. Here's a comparison of the size differences between my three lenses. So the 50 sits right in the middle. It's pretty comparable in size to the 35 millimeter, just a little bit bigger, and it does feel substantially heavier than the 35 millimeter. But the 75 millimeter is even more significantly larger and heavier than the 50 millimeter. All three lenses have that same super premium feel and build quality. The focus rings are smooth, but the aperture rings all feel slightly loose, and I wish they would make them with harder stops when turning the aperture ring. For the accessories I brought on this trip for the M11, I brought the leather half case that I bought on Amazon. It's much cheaper than the Leica branded half case, and the leather looks like it's great quality, and the texture matches the Leica M body almost exactly. There is some small branding on the bottom of the case, but it gives overall good coverage and protection of the camera. And there's a door at the bottom you can open to access the charging port and the battery, so you don't have to take off the case. I have the thumb support on top, which is also a third-party brand, but it's good quality and it gives extra comfort holding the camera. And I installed a screen protector on the back. I couldn't find a third-party screen protector, so I got this one from Leica. It is expensive, $45, and they only give you one screen protector in the package. So that's bad if the installation goes wrong. But the installation for me went perfect this time. The strap is from Artist and Artisans. It's a nylon strap and it's very quick and very easy to quickly adjust. So I can make it longer when I want it at my hip or make it shorter when I want it closer to my chest. And here's the camera bag that I brought with me. It's from Oberwerth and it's made of a nice premium leather. It's a dark brown leather, so it doesn't stand out and fits into almost any situation. It's very lightweight, but it does come with a canvas shoulder strap, which is non-detachable, but it is easy to adjust. Very small and lightweight, but I don't think it would do well in the rain. It has enough room inside to carry just my M11 or just my Q2, but it wouldn't have any room for anything else. There's a very small pocket on the side which I use to store an extra SD card, and I use the pouch, which is adjustable to store my 75 millimeter lens. And then I use the front pocket to store my power bank, which I did need to use to top off the battery of my iPhone and my M11. So you can charge your M11 on the go using the USB cable. And in the main compartment, I had the USB cord, a small bottle of water, and my glasses. So I had this strapped across my chest and resting on my hip. And I had my M11 camera out the whole time, also strapped across my chest and sitting a little bit higher than the bag. So I'll go over some of my sample photos. Each of these were shot in full resolution 60 megapixels. It makes the pictures sharp, but it does take up a lot of room, especially on my Lightroom account, which only has 20 gigabytes total for cloud storage. And they were mainly shot at f8, and I left the shutter speed and ISO at automatic. So most of these came out fairly sharp for me as a beginner rangefinder shooter, and I didn't have to crop very much. I did edit them with Lightroom, mainly bringing up the contrast and bringing up the color slightly. I think the 50 millimeters worked well for Grand Central Station. This had plenty of room where I could walk up closer or I could walk back to give a wider shot. And this was fairly low light with a lot of artificial lights. So the M11 and the 50 millimeter lens have pretty good low light capability. And again, I only use the 75 millimeter with the Statue of Liberty shots. So I was able to get little closer up shots from the ferry boat. And I also shot these at f8, and I think they came out pretty sharp. I think the sharpness and color rendering are pretty much the same between the 50 and 75 millimeter lenses. For the buildings and architecture that I shot, I think the 50 millimeter worked out perfectly. It let me get in closer than a 35 millimeter would, so I could get more details on the building. But it was wide enough that I could feature more than one building in a shot. The views of Central Park also turned out great with the 50 millimeter. I think a 24 millimeter would just bring too many things into the shot. I can use a 50 millimeter and step back to get a wider view, but I can also use the 50 millimeter to limit the amount of things that are in the shot, and that can focus the attention to where I want it. This is one place where the 75 would have worked better than my 50. This person was on a photo shoot, so I stepped near the photographer and just snapped a photo of my 50 millimeter. But I think as a portrait lens, a 75 millimeter would work better. Here's a mini portrait of a statue with the 50 millimeter at f1.4, and I think it gives good background separation on this photo. The views of the Brooklyn Bridge also turned out great on the 50 millimeter. I was concerned I might need a wider lens to get the view of the bridges, but the 50 worked out fine. I got a wide view, but I still didn't have to crop. These photos were close to sunset, but so they had good lighting. But I think I would have gotten nicer pictures with it being a little bit darker, or even at night. But I didn't have time to stay around that long. Here in Madison Square Park, it was very dark, and the M11 with the 50 millimeter is fully capable of low light shooting. But I plan to do most of my nighttime shooting in Times Square, and the M11 also did perfectly well in this lighting situation. But here was one place where I think my 28 millimeter Q2 would have come in handy, especially when I was in the middle of the crowd. I could have taken in more in the photos. And here's another example where a wider lens would have been helpful. I couldn't step back far enough to get the whole Flatiron building into the picture, so the top got cut off with my 50 millimeter lens. So there's my experience using the 50 millimeter lens as my primary lens for shooting in the city. I think it can definitely do the job as a single lens kit. I did bring my 75 as a backup, but the shots that I did take with the 75, I think I could have used my 50 and just cropped in. I did miss out on some wider shots of Times Square and the Flatiron building, but I don't think it would have been worth it to carry around my Q2 with my 28 millimeter lens all day just for a few of those shots. If I had to do it over again, I think I would just take my 50, but I would probably reduce the resolution of the photos, which you can reduce the resolution in camera on the M11. So then the files would not be so large and take up so much space. So for now, the 50 millimeter Summilux on the M11 is my favorite one lens kit. Let me know in the comments what your favorite one lens is.